Welcome to WAY2B TV, where there's a better way to be than atheist or theist. Last week, we began the playlist, Woe to You Religion, concerning Jesus' dressing down the leaders of organized religion of his day. The playlist is simply me comparing the reported words of Jesus concerning organized religion with my own experience in the churches I served. In the video last week, we read the ancient writer's portrayal of Jesus' introduction to the problem of religion. Jesus is depicted as saying, religion calls upon tradition as its authority. Religious leaders adopt lofty titles and set themselves apart with elaborate clothing. They burden their followers and practice religion without any regard to this burden religion creates itself. And so that's what we're going to be looking at again tonight. I really didn't plan a rant per se tonight. But I thought I would relate to you a thought experiment or a thought puzzle, if you will. It's not really, I guess it's not really a puzzle, but I heard it a couple of times lately, and it goes like this. There's a pastor named Bob Graves who is a very kind man and a very well thought out man. And this is not original to him either, but that's who I heard it from. He calls himself the unconventional pastor. But at any rate, Bob was talking about having a triangle on a piece of paper, and I don't know the names he used, but we'll just pick three names. Fred came into the room and he said, "Fred, what is the sum of the internal angles of that triangle?" And Fred measured the triangle very carefully with a protractor. And when he got through, he said 180 degrees. Well, Bob said, "That's good. I want you to just be quiet about that for a bit." And then in comes Fred. And he says, "Fred, what's the sum of the angles of the triangle inside that triangle?" He said, "Oh, 180 degrees. He said, "Well, how do you know that?" He said, "Well, you know, I'm an engineer and I went to school and I learned that and I had to prove it in math, and it's something I learned very early on in high school. And that's the sum of it. It's a part of the definition of a triangle, for heaven's sakes." I said, "Okay, just need you to be quiet for a minute." And then Marvin comes in the room and he says, "Marvin, what's the sum of the internal angles in that triangle?" And Marvin says, he picks up the protractor and he looks at it. He really doesn't know what to do with it. He puts it back down. He says, Can I ask someone?" And so he asked the man that had gone to school, and the man that had gone to school said 180 degrees, of course. And so he said, "Well, it's 180 degrees." And so these three guys all know that the internal angles of that triangle, the sum of them, add up to 180 degrees. One knows by measuring it, by actually measuring it, physically measuring it. One knows by education and by learning and by years of study and so forth. The last one, Marvin, he knows because he knows someone he trusts that's normally right about such things. And so now he knows too, and it's three ways of knowing. Bob compared this to religion itself, and these are my own comments related to this. With religion itself, I think we know the way Marvin knows. Someone we trusted helped us to know. Someone that we trusted to usually be right about these sorts of things. Now, for some of us, like me, it might have been from the cradle. It might have been our parents as we grew up, and we knew. That's the way we knew. We can't measure it. we can't prove it by science or mathematics, but we know it because we can trust it because someone that we trust and love and have confidence in told us. And I think, quite frankly, that's the way most of us know everything. And so I think when the atheist looks at the theist and decides to be supercritical, they need to be careful, because the theist doesn't know there's a God and doesn't know there are supernatural things because they're stupid. They know it because someone they trusted told them so and taught them so. And some, maybe not from the cradle. Maybe later on it was people they trusted in life. Maybe later on it caught some catastrophe, something in their life caused them to search out an answer, and they got that answer from someone they trusted, and it included religion. I just think it's an important point. I think it's an important point in that at WAY2B TV, what we're interested in mostly is that somehow or another we bring the argument and the discussion over religion itself to a point that we're not tearing down anyone, but rather we're looking at it logically and trying to bring from it the best that we can. Now, one of the important parts of that is that as we move along, religion has always morphed. And what's happening right now to religion is that we're in a time when morphing is at a pace that's really uncomfortable for most people who are very, very religious. And as a part of that, there's some things that are going to have to be let go of. And there's going to have to be some patience with the time it takes to let go of it. Because when it gets right down to it, what's most important is the people at the table, not the argument itself. And I think we never need to forget that. I think we always need to remember that. As we move on into this evening, though, let me see here. Where do I need to be? I need to be right there. All right. So as we move on into the evening, we want your questions and comments. There are several ways to do this. First, callers can call 863-940-0047. And I haven't gotten a phone call yet. This is show number 10, by the way. And so this is our 10th show, and we've not had a phone call yet. If some of you all take an urge to be on the phone, feel free to do so. We've done something with Joni's sound tonight to where she's not on the phone. And we'll experience that here in just a few minutes. And I want to know how it sounds to you all. Secondly, we have an active Twitter feed. On screen throughout the broadcast, just tweet hashtag WAY2BTV and the chat room is open. On a computer monitor, you should see the chat room to the right of your video stream. If you're watching a PC full screen, you will not be able to see the chat room. You can interact with us in between broadcasts by email at interact@way2b.org, and you can text the way to 22828 to receive our newsletter each Thursday morning. Each newsletter will have a direct link to the broadcast. The newsletter also contains the discussion starter videos we'll be using that same Thursday evening. Finally, to receive direct notices each time we upload, please subscribe to our WAY2B TV channel on YouTube. When you see the WAY2B TV logo in the bottom right-hand corner, you can do so directly by clicking on it. This would help us greatly. Okay, so we definitely do have Joni with us tonight.
Hello.
Now we should have better sound tonight. Say something so they can hear you, Joni.
You want me to count like testing 1, 2, 3 or whatever I usually do?
we've laughed.
Happy birthday, Betty.
We've laughed for days about that. We've taken this other step in improving the sound. It'll take a mixer board and a new XLR mic to get much farther, but it seems to be muchly improved, and I think this will help. She's no longer on the phone, which frees up the phone for other callers, and I hope somebody will do that. She is now coming across our broadcast system. So I would appreciate you guys commenting on the chat whatever you hear. If the sound's good, I need to know it. If you're having problems, I need to know it, because this is the first broadcast since we improved it. And in this particular arena, in this particular broadcasting arena, what happens is, for some reason, you really don't know if you've crossed all your T's and dotted all your I's until you both record and broadcast. Now, we can record in the middle of the week, and we can even do some test broadcasting. But until we actually are on and involved, we really don't know if we've solved it. So I need to know that. I'm also getting a streaming issue from YouTube, and if the sound is not good, I need to know about that. Just let me know about my sound, her sound, the whole bit, because we're getting an audio signal from YouTube saying that we have a poor quality audio. Now that message has just gone away, so maybe that's good. Colleen said, "Oh hell, Colleen, I didn't see you on there." So we got Colleen and Jan and Carol on there tonight. That's fantastic. So Joni's sound is better. Yeah, Joni, recite something, because you don't talk long enough for him to know anything.
Too bad.
She really does have good.
You have some feedback there, so read it.
Yeah, I see it. It said the sound is much better, Carol says, and it should be. She doesn't sound tinny, and she doesn't sound like she's on the telephone, and she also her lips are in sync with her mouth, which is a really wonderful thing. Then you don't look like a clown. So
I can't do that live.
You can't, huh?
No.
Yeah. Well, your sound is real good here in the studio, and it's going to be because you're connected directly to me. But for them, you're connected to me, and you go through the system here, and then they hear you. So they're hearing something that either one of us are hearing. Okay? And so I won't know until in the morning when I bring up the show to edit it and send it out how good it did. So that's cool. Colleen said she missed last week because she had a migraine. My little brother has migraines. I don't know if you have the kind where you have to go in the room and shut the door and turn out the lights and all that, but migraines are tough. And my daughter has migraines from time to time also. My little brother Daryl's had them for a long time, most of his life, and they can be debilitating without question. Well, in the video this evening, the ancient writer continues his portrayal of Jesus' warnings concerning religion. Jesus' followers were reportedly known as people of the way. The ancient writer depicts Jesus as saying, in essence, if religion wants to pave the way for people of the way, religious leaders must first be followers of the way themselves. And so let's give this let's listen to the video, and then we'll get started. And you guys continue to be thinking of church stories too. In the previous Woe to You Religion video, we read the ancient writer's portrayal of Jesus' introduction to the problem of religion. Jesus is depicted as saying, religion calls upon tradition as its authority. Religious leaders adopt lofty titles and set themselves apart with elaborate clothing. They burden their followers and practice religion without any regard to this burden religion creates. In this video, the ancient writer continues his portrayal of Jesus' warnings concerning religion. Jesus' followers were reportedly known as people of the way. The ancient writer depicts Jesus as saying, in essence, if religion wants to pave the way for people of the way, religious leaders must first be followers of the way themselves. The ancient writer has Jesus saying, but the greatest among you shall be your servant, and whoever exalts oneself shall be humbled, and whoever humbles oneself shall be exalted. Religion's need to exalt itself defeats its stated purpose, to serve. I cannot be at the same time the revered one and have this way about me. It is contradictory. Either I love public affirmation or I feel content, humble by the treasure of the changed attitude developing in me. I yearn for my parishioners' validation, or I am comfortable in my own skin. Either I am anxious to be noticed, or I want to be a genuine, non-anxious presence for others. You can have this way about you only if you get your mind off the messenger and onto the message. The message speaks most profoundly to your way of being. Jesus' statement conveys the humility necessary to be people of the way. Then the ancient writer has Jesus persisting in his contiguous line of thought with illustrations of how the practice of religion shuts off the way to be. Though there appears to be 8 of them, these illustrations are known as the 7 woes. The ancient writer's words attributed to Jesus are more than poignant. In each woe, the ancient writer has Jesus accusing religion of play acting. The first woe refers directly to this kingdom of heaven, found within people of the way. Each woe employs the same opening phrase, "Woe to you, religion, hypocrites." But woe to you, religion, hypocrites, because you shut off the kingdom of heaven from others, for you do not enter in yourselves, nor do you allow those who are entering to go in. We hinder ourselves from being in the way until our religion gets out of the way. We mix an abundance of religious practice with a smattering of the way to be, obstructing the way. Jesus purportedly accuses religion of an innate inability to do as it says do. The writer follows with woes that illustrate religion's hypocritical inabilities. He has Jesus accusing religion of being callous. Woe to you, religion, hypocrites, because you devour widows' houses, even while for a pretense you make long prayers. Therefore you shall receive greater condemnation. One temptation as a minister has been to employ health, wealth, and guilt to solicit effort and assets from parishioners regardless of their personal hardships. The statement, "you must give sacrificially," is calloused. The way helps me see the limitation on myself that I am indeed poor in spirit without spiritual knowledge. Making promises in the name of some supernatural being is unethical. I should not deliver some sort of religious IOU. Religion fails in its primary responsibility. From a pulpit, I dare not tout the miraculous doing of ancient persons, historical or mythical, as examples of how, if one had faith to work in religion, one's circumstances in life would be all better. Or if one had faith to give abundantly to religion, one's finances would likewise be somehow favored. People of the way find a way to be content in whatever circumstances they find themselves. I should be thankful for the provision that comes my way, but I cannot establish quid pro quo with some supernatural force. It rains on those religion labels as bad people, and it rains on those religion labels as good people. Life goes on for everyone, and it goes on naturally, without supernatural intervention. As a minister, a friend to religion, I have not always done well to take care in teaching the way of being and let doing naturally follow. My zeal for stuffed staff and the Sunday morning ritual has tempted others away from responsibilities of employment and family. Religion makes long public pleas while devouring even the widow's house. Parishioners write checks of time and money they cannot cash to meet religious obligation they do not owe. As a minister, I have sometimes delivered the bill. Next, the writer has Jesus continuing with the futility of religious process. Woe to you, religion, hypocrites, because you travel about on sea and land to make one proselyte. And when that person becomes one, you make that one twice as much a child of hell as yourselves. Religion searches far and wide for adherents. The more religion attracts, the more labor and financial resources religion has to devour. Memories of my own work in religious institutions haunt me. The vast majority of all religious budgets were allocated to the buildings, the utilities, the staff, and mostly me. Most of the emotional suffering I witnessed in religious leadership was over control of the precious little remaining finances. Have I taught parishioners to value ownership over relationship? Have I taught them to be gentle, to be people of the way? I remember in a board meeting, 2 women argued so vehemently over whether to buy loaf bread and cold cuts or to purchase pre-made sandwiches. Each of them had crocodile tears flowing down their cheeks. In another religious setting, 2 men were so obsessed about the cost of heating, they became combative over 3 or 4 degrees on the thermostat. One of the most profound examples of valuing ownership over relationship came just before I began as pastor in still another setting. A minority group of parishioners so opposed the construction of a family life center, they ran off the majority who gave to build it. Then, in protest of its existence, the surviving leaders bound the push bars of its double doors with padlocks and chains. When I began my work with them, even the electricity had been cut off in protest of a building. Just as the kingdom of heaven is Jesus' figure of speech for the way of contentment, a child of hell is Jesus' figure of speech for the way of torment. The closer newcomers, proselytes, get to the central working of religion, the less enchanted they become. They come looking for contentment, whether they understand the metaphorical kingdom of heaven or not. Religion attracted them with a selfish feeling. In exchange for their time and money, religion offered them spiritual music, participation in public liturgy, and public prayers. Religion helped them to be seen and heard by each other as religious. Then religion gave them hell. Each one of these videos is going to be a continuation of the story and the way I felt about it when I was pastoring churches. One of the interesting things about it is Jesus' comments in his woes, if the ancient writers are correct about what he said. You always have to throw that in there. But his comments about the woes, he was talking about the religion of his day, of course. And the religion of his day was thousands of years old. What's interesting is we've now come to the point that the religion that developed out of Jesus is also thousands of years old. And we could not look more like that religion today than what's described in these woes. It's just really quite remarkable to see. I noticed that several of you all have already been on the chat room making comments. Mary said that she recalls when numerous times when the Catholic priest came unannounced to her parents' home to collect money. One of the clients I had in Richmond, Virginia, was a Catholic man, and he and I were good friends. He invited me to his house, and I had dinner out there and met his family, and we talked about church and all kinds of things. And then he also came to Tennessee, and he'd sit down in my office and play my banjo, which he could play, by the way. And I took him down to the Ryman Auditorium, and my clients and I, the better ones that I had, always became friends, not just client and engineer, when I had my engineering firm. But anyway, this man was a Catholic, and some of what he told me about was he was on the group at the church that collected the money for the Catholics, Mary. And they actually would send out bills. They would send out notices that we feel your family should pay this much, and this, if you want to pay it monthly, you can do it like this, and so forth. And they expected you to do it, and if you didn't do it, you got phone calls and more letters. And it wasn't just a solicitation; it was a bill. And they expected the Catholic congregation to pay it. Another man told me that one night the Catholic priest came by his home and said, and looked around the house and said, this is a really nice house and you have really nice things and so forth, and was assessing them basically about what they could afford. And then he told them, you need to, this is how much you need to give to the church. But at any rate, it's a very old thing with the Catholics. They very much feel like they're due the money. I mean, after all, you have to go get forgiveness from the priest or through the priest. So you might as well pay up. One of the things that Martin Luther, when the Protestant church was formed, Martin Luther was upset about was a thing called indulgences. And the Catholics were charging people basically for getting an indulgence for the sin they committed from the Catholic priest, being forgiven, in other words. Jan says Mary's family was struggling with raising 5 kids. She thought it was hypocritical at the time. Well, it's more than hypocritical, it was cruel. It was cruel. But now, if you've ever been to a major Baptist church, I was the chair of the personnel committee for a fairly large church. But I can promise you, in the Baptist tradition, and I imagine in most of the major churches, the larger churches in Methodist or Presbyterian or Baptist or Lutheran or Episcopalian or, for that matter, Pentecostal. But in most of the larger churches, I think you're going to find that the system by which they make sure people regularly know that they expect them to give is pretty pronounced. And as I said in the video, the word to tell somebody they need to give sacrilegiously is calloused. When the ancient writer portrays Jesus as saying, you would devour a widow's house while making long prayers. That's what, I mean, I don't know how it can mean any more than it means. And that is you're willing to take from somebody even though they're under great hardship themselves, even while you stand in front of them and do ritualistic praying and so forth. So that is part of the problem. And of course, in our country today, America is the United States of America is the country worldwide which is known to be have the greatest percentage of Christians. And we have like 80% or so that self-identify, according to Gallup poll, with Christianity, and they're quite accustomed to that situation. We have churches in this country. I don't know how it is worldwide. I don't know the laws of other countries related to taxes, but when you think about it, billions and billions and billions of dollars change hands in this country into churches, into religion, tax-free. And there is no tax paid on it whatsoever. And some people live very high and very nicely simply by being one of the major leaders in a Baptist church or a Presbyterian church or a Methodist church or whatever. And it's a real problem that most of America is beginning to see. Colleen says ours mailed at various times in the year boxes of envelopes for extra money above what my parents gave on Sundays. We used to have the offering envelope. I don't know how many of you all remember the offering envelope, but the offering envelope had, of course, you were to put your money in it and write how much on the outside, and then you seal the envelope. But also on that envelope was Bible brought, attending Sunday school, staying for worship service, daily Bible reading, so forth.
Studied lesson.
Studied your lesson. Studied your Sunday school lesson. It was a report card on top of that. And every week, in my family growing up, we filled one of those things out. And the kids fill one of them out too. They tell a story on me. I don't remember it, but of course they tell it, and I can relate to it. But they said that I had done something around the house to earn 10 cents, a dime. And my mother purposely gave me a nickel and 5 pennies in order that I might learn to tithe. And so 10 cents, a tithe would be a penny, right? So I put a penny in one of those envelopes, and the plate was coming around, and that envelope was wadded up and tear-soaked by the time that offering plate got around. I put that envelope in that plate, and I looked up at my mother and I said, "Mama, what can you buy for 9 cents?" So I think this is something that's gone on forever, but let's see here what Jan says. Jan says, let's see, I've gone past some of them. Carol says, I still find it amazing that so many of today's preachers fail to see their actions as so like the scribes and Pharisees of which Jesus spoke. And truthfully, Carol, it's been my experience in seminary and so forth, is that, and also being around other ministers, obviously, and there's always this breakfast club and these visits to each other's churches and all that kind of stuff that goes on when you're in the ministry. But what I find is most ministers today, most pastors today will argue that was the scribes and Pharisees, and that's not who we are. No, that's not who we are. But I don't know how you could read this and not say to yourself, that's who we are. That's exactly what it looks like today. Colleen says, I am one of 6 same struggle. The guilt the priest gave my parents and us as we got older was unwarranted. And yeah, I say in the video, um, you're right. Some people, because they feel like they're going to be favored by God, how many TV programs have you heard? How many, and well, for that matter, from a few pulpits, I imagine you've been in churches you've been to, I have. How many times have you heard the words, your spiritual life will never be right until you give God his part? Until you give God, and you always bring it to the storehouse, and the storehouse is the church. Okay? You don't go out and help all your neighbors that are poor with your money. That's not giving to God. Giving to God is taking it to the storehouse. Okay? But you've also heard, especially on television, is your life will be favored. Your finances will be favored. Your offering will come back to you pressed down and shaken and pressed down, tenfold, 100-fold, and that sort of thing. And in my opinion, and I know this is somewhat controversial for some people, but in my opinion, that sort of plea, even in a church, should be illegal, because it is unethical and it is dishonest. But we use guilt, and it's just one of the, I don't know how anybody else in this country could market on television the way that some TV preachers do and get away with it. You would have the FCC on your back before you knew what happened, if you were outside of religion doing the same thing. Jan says, my father actually was on the building fund and made appointments to meet with parishioners and solicit money. Today he thinks it is hypocritical for a number of reasons. Carol said, I saw a site on Facebook where a woman got a letter from her church telling her she was delinquent in her tithes. And yeah, I don't know if the woman was Catholic or not, but that's not too uncommon for a Catholic church to do it just exactly like that. One of the things I experienced here in the park was a lady who had been divorced for 30 years. And there was a knitting club up there, and I sat down with them and we were talking and so forth. And somebody said I was a minister, and she looked at me and she said, she reached down in her knitting bag and tears were running down her face, and she pulled out this letter. And her husband was wanting to get remarried or something. And the Catholic priest had sent her a letter telling her she needed to get on an airplane, fly up north. We're in Florida now. Fly up to Illinois or wherever it was, and be interviewed by the Catholic Church related to her husband, and in order that they might be able to grant his request. And she informed them that she could not afford to do such a thing. And they said, well, then you'll have to go and meet with a local Catholic priest there in your town, and we will call him and inform him about what we're doing, and then we'll let you know where you're supposed to go. And that's what they did, and darned if she didn't do it. And she went there. Now, I don't know how in the world anybody in a church thinks that 30 years after the fact, they had even a smattering of a right to pester that woman. But that's how arrogant it gets. And she had nothing to do with it. Whatever it is her husband of 30 years ago was doing, he could do it on his own, And she didn't need to be battered by the church and called in before a priest. She thought she had forgotten all of that kind of treatment. And she was sitting there on that couch by the time she got through telling me the story, just bawling. And that's just not right. It is just not right. But at any rate, Colleen says many parishes have gone back to tithes. Yeah, I don't know of many. I don't know of any Baptist churches, or at least I don't think Baptist churches have given up on tithes. But I will tell you this, from being a minister and from working in the church, being on finance committees, being the chair of a personnel committee for a decent-sized church and so forth, I can tell you this. It's not 20% of the church even that tithes, not even 10%. So you might be surprised if anyone's ever guilted you into tithing, trying to make you think the whole church is doing it, they're not. They're not. That's not what's going on. Um, they'll take any amount you want to give them. If you want to give them $1, they'll take the $1. So Jan says, regarding the priest looking around the house, Mary says he saw the orange crates used for furniture and still wanted a minimum tithe. Wow. So, Mary, you grew up in a home with orange crates for furniture. In seminary, we used to tell stories at the cafeteria table, and which one of us had it the worst before we came to seminary, and also which of us was the baddest before we came to the seminary, or before we got involved with religion. And I think you got us all topped if you were living in a house where you had furniture that was crates. I think you should have been there to tell us stories. But yeah, and he still wanted a tithe. Jan said, delinquent in tithes, yikes. Colleen says, when we were stationed in Nebraska, one Catholic parish insisted on tithes if the families expected their children to attend Catholic schools. Now that's interesting, because if that is very interesting, because it's actually illegal for a religious organization to solicit money in exchange for goods or services, unless they pay federal income tax on those goods and services.
That's true of any nonprofit.
That's right. It's true of any nonprofit, because the zoo's a nonprofit, where Joni works. But the fact is, that sounds a lot like that to me. It sounds like to me they're saying, you want your kids to go to Catholic school? Then you better cough up the tithe. And all they're doing is the tuition basically is not taxable when it's tithed. You follow what I'm saying? They give it as a tithe. It's an offering to the church. They never connect one to the other. You get my point?
That's slick.
That is slick, but that's exactly what that is. That's tax evasion. So that's kind of interesting. Carol said, really? Uh-huh. Even the children were expected to give $5 a month, Carol said. Sounds like a threat or coercion at a minimum, Jan said. Let me see if I can find. Boy, y'all are just typing away, aren't you? As a child, I had to give a quarter every Sunday, Colleen said. Yeah, that penny I gave when I was paid 10 cents was the biggest burden I ever had to overcome, I believe, at least according to my parents. Colleen says, Tinder. What does
Render?
Huh?
Render, not tender. Oh, I'm ahead of you. I'm sorry.
No, you're there. Render unto God. I see. She has tender unto God. Would you tell me you got butter on your fingers, Colleen? Render unto God what is God's. Oh yes, I remember. Yeah. So yeah, but that was the taxes, right? I mean, they asked him whose picture's on it. Jesus said, whose picture's on this coin? Well, Caesar's. Well, you render unto Caesar what is Caesar, and render unto God what is God's. Well, the taxes are Caesar's, okay? So, yeah, Colleen wrote render, not tender. Carol said that church that sent the delinquent tithe letter was Baptist. Well, I'm sure of that. Oh, I'm sure of that. I was on a committee one time, and it was called, you remember the Pony Express, Joni?
Yeah.
Yeah. I was on a group that they did Pony Express, and we went out house to house. We were the Pony Express, and we were going out giver by giver by giver and trying to get them to give over and above what they regularly gave so that we could raise money for a special project. Might have been a building or something, I can't remember. And so they were to give sacrificially over and above what they normally give. I have never heard a church say, I have said it myself. As a matter of fact, when I was in Massachusetts, I managed to get that church to stop passing the offering plate altogether, which was probably a very radical thing. But we were already poor, and we stayed poor, and it stayed about the same either way. But I think that a lot of what we do, the rituals that we formed, is in order that, I mean, the giving ritual in a church is exactly what it looks like. Everybody else is putting something in the plate, right? That's the idea. It's peer pressure. Religion is peer pressure on steroids. Um, Jan says, regarding an annulment, my sister refused to sign an annulment because she said she would not invalidate the lives of her 3 children by this man. Um, yeah, and I don't know what they do with the annulment, but marriage, by the way, was not originally a church thing. Marriage was originally the marriage license in America, for instance. Let's put it that way. The marriage license in America came about in the early 1900s to keep African American men from marrying white women. And that's where it originally, as I understand it, that's where it originally came from. Colleen says it was the richest parish in town. And she says, LOL, just typos, lots of typos. So yeah. The verse at the end of the video where he says you go about on sea and land to make one proselyte. And the word proselyte simply means a convert. You bring them over. One of the things that rival churches sometimes will say is, you're proselyte. You're trying to get our members, okay? But you make one proselyte and you make them as much a child of hell as yourselves. And I really do think that the way of the kingdom of heaven was Jesus' metaphor for the way of contentment. And I think the child of hell is Jesus' phrase for the way of torment. But churches do that. I mean, churches, the more members that you have, obviously, the more houses you've got to devour when you get right down to it. And so it's just a matter. It's like I used to refer to the church as the song that never ends. It goes on and on, my friend. Someone started doing it, not knowing what it was, and it just kept on doing it forever just because. Well, I used to have a set of busy gears. I got them back there in the closet. I should have brought them out here tonight. Maybe I'll bring them out next week. But I would put those busy gears made by Play School on a little pegboard that they put with it when they sell it, and you got the gear. And I said, this is the church, and I would put a crank in there because they got little cranks that come with them, and I would turn that gear and say that's the little church that got started, and I would turn the crank, and then a few other people came along, and you add more gears, and then they decided to create a mission or a split off of some kind of a junior church from it, and out to the side you'd have another one connected by some small gears and so forth, and you'd turn the crank and everything would turn, and basically the church's purpose seems to be to keep on turning the crank. Have you ever noticed that? Because in reality, and I said that in the video too, in reality, about 95% of all churches in America have less than 100 people, less than 70 or 80 people. And the pastor of such a church, virtually all the time, unless you're in some church where there's a huge donor of some kind that it's the benefactor and the bills are paid that way. But 95% of the time, those pastors of those small churches and medium-sized churches even, the vast majority of all the money given by the church is used to pay the pastor's salary. And then you have building expenses. Even if you have your mortgage paid off, you have utilities, you have repairs, you have insurance, and so forth. And what you wind up with, and then you join some denomination that wants a piece on top of that. And that's true of Baptists, it's true of UCC, it's true of just about everybody. By the time you get through, you've got a group of people sitting in a room arguing over the precious little that is left. And that's it. And they're really, when the people talk about ministry and the ministry of the church, there are large religious organizations who have done some mighty fine things, don't get me wrong. There's a lot of good that's been done in the world by churches, but for the most part, the vast majority of churches do little or no ministry. They might collect some cans and put it in a place in the corner of the church and have a food closet of some kind. They might have. Well, there was a church in Murray, Kentucky, where I was a deacon. That church, it was a First Baptist church. That church had an upstairs, a large upstairs space that was dedicated to clothes, and they would get clothes from all over town and bring them in, and they would sort them by sizes, and people would come and get those clothes for free. Now that's a good thing to be doing. It really is. But it doesn't even begin to represent the size of that church and the budget of that church. And, you know, they had very fancy building and they had elevators. And I mean, the fact is the percentage, the amount of money that actually goes to actually help people with food and clothing and shelter and to help them find jobs, help them with their health care and so forth. That amount of money being spent by the church is a teeny tiny amount compared to the overall collections of religion in this country. And so we need to be, I think the church's main thing really is just the money has to keep flowing and the people have to keep coming. They need the labor and they need the money in order to keep turning the crank and keep all the gears spinning. That's about what gets accomplished. Now, as I said last week, there's the vast majority of people who go to church go for the social interaction. They go because they enjoy being with their friends. They even enjoy talking about the troubles with each other. And yes, they do enjoy the spirituality of it, if you will. The feeling like they can let their burden go somewhere else, and that there's something somewhere taking their burden. And I think that's an important thing. And certainly I've done enough funerals to know that at the end of life, there's probably no one like the church to care for those people who are grieving. And so it's really a difficult problem that we're talking about. And yet Jesus dealt with it in his day, and he pointed out very clearly, without mincing words, what was happening to people as they became addicted to the church and had not learned the way themselves, had not learned how to tend to their own problems, to be content within their own selves, and be able to live life no matter what circumstances came their way, in a way that would be content. They could be content. And I think we've missed it. I wished over the centuries, over the millenniums, we had somehow learned how to teach people the way of building this genuine person inside of ourselves that can remain content and remain a non-threatening presence for all the people that are around them, to be someone who had this way about them, such that they made a healthy presence among the population and within the community. They knew how to live in community with other people, and at the same time, they let other people be other people. One of the things I used to say is, first you need to see the child. First you need to be the child in the way. Jesus said the one that comes to the way needs to become like a child. You all know that expression. But you need to be the child. Then you need to learn to be the child, to be content as a child, and then you need to see the child in others, because other people make mistakes. Other people say things they wouldn't wish they hadn't said. You do so also. I do so also, and they commit actions that they should not commit. And in the process, we would rather judge them than to see the woundedness that is in them and the humanness that is in them, and that and to reassure them that they still have friends and they still have people who understand that they're not someone who can pull off the immaculate reception, if you will. So, at any rate, that I got off on a preaching bent there a little bit. Let's see. Oh gosh, Moses, y'all are typing like crazy. I married a non-Catholic Colleen says, and my parish priest refused to baptize my first son. Now, I had that in my church in Massachusetts. They wouldn't baptize their kids because of one thing or the other, stating he was a bastard. Really, in the eyes of the church. That's really something. Carol said, unreal. Colleen said, I was crushed. What you going to say, Joni?
She was being disciplined for marrying outside the church.
Right. You're not supposed to marry outside the church. Jan says,
supposed to have your own brain.
Yeah. I think your sound sounds good. I hope it does it for them too. My great grandparents, Jan says, who were Catholics, stole my uncle as a baby from his non-Catholic parents to have him baptized in the Catholic Church. Colleen says things that went on were unreal. Yeah, I'd say so. Jan says, fortunately or unfortunately, he was stolen back before they did the dirty deed. And Colleen says, good for his parents. Yeah, good for his parents.
Maybe good for him.
Yeah. Colleen says, New Hampshire parish. Absolutely, Joni. What was she answering there, Joni?
That she was being disciplined.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. She was being disciplined for marrying outside the church, for not, being in line, stepping in line. One of the things I've always had trouble with is ministers who walk around like they have some kind of grand authority. And that's not just true in the Catholics, it's true in the Protestant church too. But in the Catholic Church, it's almost a way of life because, and it's why so many things, so many abuses have taken place, and not just the ones with the boys and the Catholic priests, but all kind of financial abuses and all kinds of things. They get the feeling like they deserve it. They feel like they're owed it. They feel like they're entitled. I guess
it's called a God complex.
Yeah.
You see it in certain CEOs also.
Right. And you've heard people say that you need to understand that you're not God. That God is God and you're not God. There's a whole sermon that goes with that statement too. But nonetheless, it's hard to believe just exactly how entitled some ministers feel. And when you see people, some of the wealthiest pastors in this country are very, very well thought of and have had to try to explain themselves to the federal income, the IRS, more than one time. Because they get to feeling like, this is okay. I can do it this way. And it's really okay. And you rationalize until you've gone way over the line. And I don't know how you all feel about it. We only got about 6 more minutes, which is unbelievable. Because I was feeling lousy tonight. And I didn't know if I was going to make it all the way through this or not. But it's about 6 more minutes. But one of the things I wanted to ask you before we got off, and if you want to make some comments about this, I would appreciate it. How do you feel about the idea that very possibly the religion in America should pay taxes like every other person on its income? Briefly, one of the reasons is, for instance, we had a guy in our church in Tennessee who was on the deacons with me, and he said, my wife and I run a daycare out here on Old Fort Parkway, and we have scrimped and saved, and we pinch our pennies and try to do the maintenance and pay the bills and so forth, and the amount that we have to charge the families to keep the kids is way more than their own church. The church that we were deacons in had a daycare, and said that our own church can charge the families much less than we can afford to charge them, and then also pay no property tax on the property on which the daycare is operated. And so it seemed to him that the church was taking advantage, and they were in a business and competing with other businesses in the same community, and but had escaped the tax system. And that's just like the thing we were talking about a while ago with your kids can go to Catholic school if you tithe. Well, let's face it, That's tax evasion. How do you all feel about that? Do you feel, Colleen says, I absolutely agree that religions should pay taxes. They are corporations now. Yes, they are. They're very big corporations, and some of them bring in millions of dollars a year, totally tax free. And when the pastors paid $200,000, and that's not unusual, by the way, with the big churches, that some pastors getting paid $200,000 a year. He's getting paid that. He pays taxes. He pays payroll taxes and income taxes like anyone else, but he's being paid it with tax-free money. And so the money was given. There was no if he worked for a store downtown instead of that church, that store would earn profits. They'd pay taxes on those profits, and they would be able to deduct his salary as an expense related to those profits. That's the way it should work in a church. They shouldn't be able to collect $1 million, give him $200,000 on which he has to pay taxes, by the way, and then $800,000 of it would be tax free. And same thing goes with everything else that they do. And so, yeah, Jan said, I think there would be a lot less church buildings if churches had to pay taxes. There might be, but you know, the original church was what? What do they call it? Y'all know what to call it. What was the original church called related to the building? A house church.
Yeah, they met in homes.
Yeah, they were a house church. The original church was a house church. And so they didn't have that kind of overhead. There is a house church movement in this country. Type in house church on the web, and you will discover there are people who do not want robes, do not want ministers, do not want any kind of ornate things, don't want fancy anything. They get together in their homes and do little Bible studies and so forth. They sing and so forth. And there's a house church movement that you can join in this country, and that seems a lot healthier to me than the corporations, as one of you all just pointed out. Carol says it may be a lot less rich pastors. Colleen says, unbelievable the incomes. I cannot fathom it, the reasoning of it. Jan says, do they have to pay taxes on their book royalties? Well, theoretically, yes, because they're exchanging something for money. But the way that they've gotten out of that, let's say that you're listening to me preach right now on television, and during the break, there's a man comes on with a perfect radio voice. First of all, beautiful radio voice, and he says, Elise has a brand new book that will enrich your soul. It will change your spiritual life forever. And this book today, she is offering it to you for a gift of any amount to Elise Ministries. And whatever amount you give, you get this free book. Okay? Well, the way that works, they have to pay taxes on the retail. You have to in other words, let's say I decided
it's the difference between what the cost is and what it sells for.
Right. And not the giving now. Wait a minute. Because what it does, in other words, let's say you decide the book is worth $12 on the retail market, and it costs $3 to print it. Okay? That's $9 profit. That's taxable. Let's say the gift was $50. The other $28 is off the tax books. True?
I don't know about that.
That's true. That's how that works.
Because it's a donation?
Yes. In other words, they're letting them, we're going to give it to you for anything. They never mention taxes or anything because they can't. They don't want to. They want you to think you're getting this absolutely free book, and that they're going to get the whole $50 or the whole $40 or whatever it is you give. Then they have to do the mathematics, and they have to fill out the forms, and they got to pay the taxes on how much profit was made out of a retail book, because it's exchanging goods and services for money. It's what we just talked about a few minutes ago. And so, but most of that is never mentioned. I think there ought to be some kind of, at least do it the way the pill people have to do it, the pharmaceuticals. They got 80 million little They got little 80 million little fine print words at the bottom of the screen, and somebody who can talk faster than a freight train reading those words at the end of the commercial. Okay, maybe that's what the religions ought to have to do. I don't know.
Freight trains can't talk, dear.
Colleen said, that's real cute. Colleen said similar to Amish services, they go house to house on Sundays. Wow.
For their meetings.
Well, if we're gonna keep our thing going, we're gonna have to stop on the hour, and this is the end of the hour. We're right at the bottom of the hour, and so I'm gonna have to send you to credits. But gosh, Moses, we had a fast and furious discussion tonight. I appreciate all the church stories. It's interesting, all the things that y'all had to say, and love all of you all, and thank you for being on here tonight. I feel better just for getting this done and for doing it. I almost bailed on you today because I am feeling lousy.
No, you're not. Look at that face.
Anyway, but I'll be putting out the newsletter in the morning, the one that has the archive show in it, and you guys just keep coming back and try to bring some other people into it. Go ahead and use the forward button on the newsletter and forward to as many people as you can think of. And let's see if we can get our listening audience up a little bit. So God bless y'all and good night.
See you next week.